Our business is Damson Cloud. We've been a Google partner for actually 10 years, so at the end of this year it'll be 10 years. We're one of Google's longest standing partners in Europe, and we've been involved in Google, as I said, for a long time, and have seen that sort of transformation, that change that has happened. Our goal is to really help companies reimagine work. The cloud workspace is one without boundaries, without restrictions, as we've seen from Roman. And it's no longer a location. It doesn't happen in a particular place, and it doesn't happen at a particular time. And it's about how we can help companies enable that change. My personal background is change management and business transformation, and that's what I help customers with. This new way of work, this idea of digital transformation, and breaking apart that sort of old way and outdated ways and processes of doing things. And we've kind of heard from a couple of you in the room who've said that that's something that you're trying to do. Our mission is to help organizations leverage the cloud to drive organizational change, and there's been a lot of questions around that. So I'm hoping that my part of the piece will help you guys help answer a lot of those questions for you. We've operations in Dublin and London. Dublin is where our business began and our kind of home of the organization. But we saw in the early days of the business significant growth in the UK market. So we've three pillars within our business, which is migrate, secure, and innovate. The migrate piece is where we essentially use our expertise to try and stop customers hitting those pitfalls. So we want to make sure that we can help you guys avoid those pitfalls. And that's where the journey begins. You need to get your data up onto the cloud. You need to start and take that first step. And then the next piece is secure. And we've talked about security already. Security first is something that we promote within Damson, and we believe and know from our experience that we can make your data more secure and give you more control over your data if it's in the cloud. And very often it's just having that conversation, that sort of training piece around that, and maybe not really advising, but just sort of there can be misinformation there, as we've kind of seen in the conversations that we've already had today. So a lot of it is just around that, and some tools that we would sell that will augment your Google environment and help you keep it secure. Then we get on to the innovate bit, which is the digital transformation piece, and that's primarily where I'm going to be focused today. The change management, the transformation. I think that seems to be where the most interest is. So hopefully people will be engaged with that. Obviously, our primary partnership is Google, but we do have other companies that we partner with as well. Now, these other companies are a lot of the add-ons that Roman was talking about. So these are companies that have created integrations with the G Suite or Google environment. So our primary one in this is Hapio. It used to be called Universe, in case you know it by its previous name, and it's a digital workspace. It's an interesting tool, and we only partner with companies that align with our own sort of three pillars. So that's security and digital transformation. Hapio fall into that digital transformation piece. We find customers who've been using G Suite for a while and then want to maybe move on to integrating more of their business processes and tools. They very often look at maybe some digital workspace or intranet solution would have been traditionally called. And then the other tools tend to be around security and management and backup of your Google environment. And I know there are some IT people here today, so they would probably be tools that you would be interested in. And we always say to customers that, just because your data is in the cloud doesn't mean you shouldn't back it up and you shouldn't secure it. And in fact, we would recommend that you do. A handful of our customers, hopefully you'll recognize some of these brands. Adverts.e, Daft.e, Brown Bag Films is a company here in Ireland, and then we've got a couple of UK brands as well. It's just a handful of some of the companies that we've worked with over the last 10 years. Okay, so the digital transformation piece. When we think about digital transformation, a lot of us are primarily thinking about collaboration. That's really what a lot of people think of when they think of digital transformation. We're also thinking of processes and changing processes, and that's definitely a part. But really we're thinking about what collaboration means and how we accelerate collaboration within our organizations. And I think collaboration is interesting because it's something that we have to do within our companies, and it's often something that we don't think about maybe enough. So there are actually two forms of collaboration. There's synchronous collaboration and asynchronous collaboration. And this is the real collaboration that's happening in your business or organizations right now, whether it's having a meeting or whether it's emailing a document back and forth. Synchronous collaboration is when it's happening in the moment. So we're collaborating right now, we're talking, we're discussing. If you're in a meeting with someone, it doesn't have to be the same physical place. That's not what it's about. It's just whether it's happening in the moment. And then asynchronous collaboration is essentially collaboration plus time. So there's some sort of time delay happening between when you're working on a project or a document or whatever it is with someone. Email, you could say, is asynchronous collaboration. You could say that working on a document and emailing it and asking for comments and getting feedback, you're working with someone, but there's a time delay between it. Now, most cloud tools are moving us more towards this synchronous collaboration. That's what we want. We want to move more of our communication towards there because it means that we can do things faster and more innovatively. Some of the examples that Roman gave, you saw that it pushed the dial towards this synchronous collaboration. There was less steps between what we were trying to get done. Okay. So when we think about digital transformation, very often people jump straight for the technology. Oh, if we swap out the technology, we get this new exciting app. It's going to be able to do X or Y. And yes, the technology is important. And I think people have indicated to this earlier on. But there are other areas too. It's really important to look at the process, and it's really important to look at the people. And we need to look at these three areas if we want to get to that point of digital transformation where the magic happens in the middle. And this is really where Google partners and some of Google's extended team come in, that changing the technology is great, but you've got to look at the process and people in order to bring about that digital transformation. That's coming back to what you were saying as well, that you're on that journey, but where does that lead and how do you get there? And so I want to dive into these areas in a little bit more detail, because you may have seen these three things mentioned before, but very often people don't necessarily know when I say people, what does that mean? When I say process, what am I talking about? So I thought it might be interesting to kind of dive into these in a little bit more detail. So when we think about people within that, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, but this is just some of the key areas that we've found. It's really important that you have leadership, that your leadership is behind the digital transformation. So your executive team, is digital transformation something that they're interested in? Is business transformation something that they're interested in? And something that they're willing to put the resources behind? And by that, I don't just mean, the money that it's going to cost. I mean, are they willing to put themselves as business sponsors, as sponsors of the head of a transformation project? Because it needs to come from the leadership. And when we look at Google projects, we try to take it out of the technology. Yes, the technology bit's important, it has to be done. But if these other areas in a Google project are not done, and you'll see this later on, the project will not be successful. So leadership is really important. Culture, and Roman and Gareth mentioned this earlier on, that very often Google projects are part of a cultural transformation project. We very often sit within maybe a larger project that's going on within the organization. So what kind of culture your organization has will either enable or hamper collaboration within the business. All of these areas that I'm going to go through are either going to help you, you look at your organization, you say, actually within our organization, our culture enables collaboration, or maybe it doesn't. That's something that we need to look at. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah. Everybody following me so far? Cool. Okay, skills within the organization. When you bring in a new tool, we need to train people, don't we? So what skills are already there within the organization when it comes to G Suite, if that's the tool that you're bringing in? Obviously, this could be used for other transformational projects. And if the skills are not there, then we need to support those people, don't we? We need to communicate with them. We need to train them. And we need to make sure that they have those skills. in order to bring about this digital transformation. Business model. Whatever business model you have could again enable or hamper the collaboration within the organization. Some business models lend themselves to collaboration, like tech companies. They tend to have a business model that helps in terms of collaboration. Tends to be again a culture and a business model where people feel that the collaboration is just a normal thing. If you work in the financial sector and you have a lot of restrictions on what you can do, then that's going to make collaboration more difficult, isn't it? So these are things that you need to take into account when you're going on your digital transformation journey. You need to make sure that if you ignore one of these, they could end up being a blocker, couldn't they, in your digital transformation journey? So when you're looking and building out your roadmap, it's important to look at these different areas and say, is this going to stop us? Is this something that we need to look at? We would often do a traffic light system with these and get people to grade them in a workshop of how we feel, working with your executive team, where we feel these particular areas are, and that can help to sort of build out the actual map. Policies and processes. So, this comes back to when organizations have migrated to G Suite and they're then looking to change these business processes. And I'm going to talk about the transformation labs later on. This is very often where we would get organizations to look at old, outdated processes and policies. And are these policies going to stop someone from collaborating or hamper collaboration? Or is there a way that we could change those to enable collaboration across the organization? Costs, coming back to maybe the leadership and the resources, is the organization willing to put the costs in place and pay for the required change that's about to happen, whether it's training, whether it's the actual technology itself. Core tools. So this is really where G Suite is aimed at, and we would obviously recommend G Suite and cloud-based tools. These will enable this synchronous collaboration, and I think it was Steve Jobs that said the best technology gets out of the way, and it's almost like magic. Do you know what I mean? And that's what we want. We want those core tools within the business that are going to support that collaboration, and we saw some of them demonstrated earlier on. Admin and IT, again, we can, as IT people, we can get in the way or we can get out of the way. If people need to log into a VPN and put in 47 passwords, then they're probably just not going to do it when they're working from home. If I can open my Chromebook and I can collaborate on a Google Doc straight away, and okay, yes, maybe I've got to put in obviously some passwords from a security point of view, but again, the more systems and stuff that get in the way of me getting to the collaboration point, and I think the example that Roman used of the smart reply, I mean, when I started using the smart reply, I thought this thing's a bit of a gimmick. I don't know about this. And then the AI system in Google started to learn how I spoke, and the smart replies became more like me, which was a little bit creepy, but also hugely valuable, because then suddenly I started to use them more and more. And so, what I'm trying to get at is, if I'm able to do that on my phone, then I'm much more likely to respond. Because I'm now doing that work while I'm on the go. And so when I get back to my desk, I do have less emails to deal with. And so my business is being more efficient. And that's really what we're trying to get through get to with this transformation. And then the last one is infrastructure. So if I don't have good broadband, it's a huge challenge in Ireland, particularly when I do this talk outside of Dublin. They very often think we're living in a bubble here, that, if I don't have the infrastructure in place, I can't get on a video call. If I don't have good internet connection, if I live in a location where there's power outages, that's infrastructure. So again, all of these things can either help us with our collaboration journey, or they can hinder our collaboration journey, and it's up to us as organizational specialists, as executives or leaders in an organization, to look at these different areas when we're building out our transformation map. I would say it's the people, and it's an interesting point that you make, and I'm going to talk about it actually in a couple of slides, about when we enable transformation with the change management piece within a Google project. It's interesting for me how it's changed. I mean, when myself and Donald started doing this 10 years ago, I can see him nodding at me. Change management wasn't seen as it was seen as important, but not as important as it is now. And Google have this little pie chart, which I'll show you in a second, And we have the technical side and the project management side, and the change management side used to be quite small. And over the last decade, it has grown and grown and grown. It is now the biggest part of a project. So the change management part is the people. Do you know what I mean? If we don't get the people bit right, we can do all the migration, and Donald and his team can do all the stuff right. But if I don't get everybody on board, not right on with the change management piece, if I can't bring them along on our journey, then they're going to reject it. Do you know what I mean? You could swap out your Microsoft Office maybe that you have for your staff and put in G Suite, but if you don't train them, if you don't support them, if you don't communicate with them, if there isn't an executive sponsorship in the leadership, if they're not saying that, you know, this is something we're doing, guys, I need you to come along with me, then it's not going to work. The processes you can work on maybe later, or do you know what I mean? So I would say the important part is definitely the people. But we will see customers, and other Google partners will see customers trying to do it on their own, and not getting the advice from Google or from a partner, and missing out some of these other pieces. So they're bringing in the tool, but they're not actually looking at the people and the process piece. Or as you say, they're looking at the people and the process, but they're not looking at looking at the process and the technology, but not looking at the people side. And like, if you look at process and technology, yes, you can do stuff like automation. Do you know what I mean? But and if you look at, you know, process, what does it say? Look at process and people, you can get a certain amount of change, but it's the whole thing. It's looking at all three is where you get the real transformation, and where it sticks. Do you know what I mean? And often a new person within the organization, particularly in leadership, maybe wants to just put their footprint on it. Do you know what I mean? Like, this wants to put their stamp, sorry, is probably a better way to say it, on the organization, and on sort of make their mark. And so sometimes it can be that there's new leadership that's been brought in. Sometimes, yeah, a business model thing where, like, they're being taken over by another company, or and by that, sorry, I don't mean like a buyover, like their competitors are getting ahead of them, and they're trying to figure out, how can we be as innovative as these guys. Sometimes it can be an influence of their peers. So the business model one is like your industry, do you know what I mean? Stuff that's going to happen within your space. You could use a broader term on that. And so sometimes it might be that, well, our competitors are getting ahead of us. They're doing these digital transformation projects. They're using Google. They're using these other tools to collaborate and innovate. If we want tools that are actually going to push us towards this synchronous collaboration, I mean, that's live Google Docs. Do you know what I mean? That's getting on a video call and not needing to install some update or some piece of software. I mean, when I get some request for a video call for some product, I mean, whether it's Skype or some other video tool, WebEx is another one where you have to, like, log on and install the last update, and it takes ages. Like with the Hangout, I send a link to someone, they click it, and they're in it. There's no update to run. It's all run in the web browser, and I think it was either Roman or Garrett said that like, Google is born on the cloud. It's born in the web browser. I mean, that's what the Chromebooks are all about. You only need a web browser to use any of these tools, and it doesn't have to be Chrome. It can be any web browser. And I think that's an interesting point. And I've seen Google do that on deals that we're in, that they'll say, I'm sorry, but like, this customer isn't ready for this. Do you know what I mean? And this is where, you know, we've learned over the years as well that we need to look at all these different areas, and we work with customers before you're even looking at G Suite. You're just, you know, you're on your digital transformation journey. You're at the beginning, and wherever you are in it, we'll sit down with you and go through these areas and see whether G Suite is a good fit or whether it's not. Like, we both want to answer the same question, you know, really. It's whether it's in or out, and you need to look at these areas, whatever tool you're bringing in, and make sure that, you know, is culture a red, an orange, or a green? Is it something that needs to be worked on, or going to be a blocker within the plan or the project? So I'm not going to get into how we sort of do a deployment, but which is sort of rolling a customer out onto G Suite or a migration. But I certainly think that the change management piece is interesting, and this was the slide I was talking about. So, you can see here that the technical side is 30%, the project management is 30%, 5% is a sort of support ramp up at the end, and then the change management part is 35%. So it's huge. And when we look at the change management, it actually, a lot of these areas will lead back to the previous slide that you saw for the digital transformation map. So the sponsorship piece, that's making sure that the leadership is engaged, isn't it? We make sure that we get executive sponsorship for a Google project. If we don't, as Roman said, we won't proceed with it. Organization analysis and transformation. So this has come back to what you were saying. We'll actually analyze the business, look at the processes, look at something that we call change impacts. How will users be impacted by the change that we're about to place onto them? Change is one of the most traumatic things that humans have to deal with. So it's really important that we put in place a good change management policy, and change impacts are hugely important. Actually, one of our recent videos was on this, was on the change management piece. I will be sharing all these slides, so don't worry if people are taking notes. And the organization analysis piece, I think this is a really key one, because you want to look at like teams within the organization, like in general users, but like, is there a specific team that's going to be impacted more by this change? So is there a support team or help desk team or marketing team that maybe specific processes that they had in the old world in Microsoft or Lotus Notes or whatever your solution is, how is that going to look for them when they move to Google? And so we would work with those teams more closely and make sure that they know they would be on the early adopter piece. We would migrate them early and make sure that the change impacts that they had, the new processes were worked out and the training was done for them. And then communication, again, the communication trainings come back to the people bit. So we want to make sure that we're communicating with people about this change, and we want to make sure that we're upskilling. Remember the skill one? We want to make sure that we're upskilling them for this new technology. So even within Google's change management methodology, you can see all of those areas are kind of ticked. Now, the last one that's not ticked is kind of the process. You might have noticed that the change management touched on most of that. There's a little bit of process here, but they tended to be bedded down processes that you're doing day to day. And this is where the transformation labs come in. And we find with companies that if they move to Google or Microsoft, whatever the system is, that they won't, people will go back to the way they did it before, unless you sort of force the change upon them, unless you show them a new way of doing it. I think they say it's 7 times someone has to do a habit, whether it's going to the gym or walking to work or whatever it is, before it will become normal, before it will become how they do something. And I think we're all like this in our personal lives as well. So the transformation labs are a way of looking at that and looking at those old processes and taking in that process piece within the people and technology. So this is a customer of ours, Waltz the Workstations, and you can see here the guys are brainstorming out the solutions on Post-it notes and whiteboards. We didn't have any Jamboards then. This was a year or so ago. And then they're prototyping out the solution. So actually on the next slide, I have the little piece. So the first thing we do is we do Inspire, and that's where we show customers what other companies have done or other teams have done in terms of changing their business processes. So here's another example of maybe, we would pick the same industry. So if I was coming out to you, I'd say, here's how UCD or Trinity or some other customer in the education space have changed their business processes that are hopefully similar to yours. And we would also try to, just as a precursor, we would also try to make sure that it's a similar team. So you generally run it with like a department. You want a minimum of about 15 people in a transformation lab, because you want at least 3 groups of 5. And then they do the discovery bit. The discovery bit is what you saw on the previous slide, where people were writing down what their business processes were. And it's a half-day workshop. And what's interesting with the transformation labs is that very often it's the first time that people have had a chance to look at their business processes. So they actually get quite excited. And that's quite interesting for me personally, because for me, it's like the first time that people have gotten to look at these business processes and say, you know what, I don't like the way we do this. This is cumbersome. This process in my day-to-day work, why is there 17 or 18 steps in it? I think it could be done in less. And so people get quite excited in the discovery phase. Very often it's actually about stopping people and bringing them back to kind of move on to the next area, which is the prototyping. The prototyping is what you saw in the other one, where the person was sort of prototyping out a particular solution. And then, as Roman said, it's an iterative process. Like the transformation lab isn't the beginning and end, or it isn't the only piece. It's the beginning of your digital transformation journey. So the transformation labs are a great way to kind of kick things off, particularly if you've got a customer like, say, yourselves, who've been using G Suite for a while, but you need to kick off that transformation to get the idea of how do we actually transform our processes? Because, as I said, the people and the technology bit the boxes get ticked by moving to the cloud if it's done correctly. But the process bit, often companies stop there, and it's just about continuing that piece. I won't necessarily read this out, but this was just that these guys had been on it for a while. Some processes had sort of grown up organically, were outdated, and we took a small group, and essentially what I sort of went through and worked on the transformation lab for the day, and they prototyped out some new solutions. We also do this impact ability to execute. So we're trying to find what Google call your quick wins. So we put the processes on a scale of how big an impact will it have on your organization? Will it have a high impact on your team or a low impact on your team if you were to improve this particular process? And then the ability to execute. Is it hard? Is it going to take a development team 6 months? Or is it easy? Is it a Google form that we can create right now? Does that make sense? Yeah, and then you're trying to find the ones up here in the top quadrant. That's what it's all about, isn't it? That whenever you see these charts, it's always about the top quadrant. The easy to execute. So just kind of coming back to this, you can kind of see how these services and how we work with our customers supports these 3 pillars that we have of migrate, secure, and innovate. And for me, really, I just want to get to this bit. Do you know what I mean? Like these we can do, and that's fine, and they're important. Very important, and they need to be done. But the exciting part is the digital transformation piece, and that's what gets me out of bed in the morning and gets me excited. So.